but Nixon was forced out of office before the trial at which this would have been revealed. Gerald Ford, a 33rd-degree Freemason and Rockefeller puppet, became president and pardoned Nixon so that the case could never came to court. He appointed Nelson Rockefeller to be his vice president and put him in charge of the Watergate investigations, which, unsurprisingly, discovered nothing of consequence. Iran-Contra. In 1975, George Bush, who had been a CIA asset since the 1950s, became director of the CIA which, by a series of measures implemented by President Ford, Rockefeller, had increasing power over the U.S. intelligence services. As his associate deputy director for covert operations, Bush named Theodore Shackley, who, with Oliver North, had masterminded Operation Phoenix in Vietnam and ran an assassination and drugs operation throughout the 1970s with Donald Gregg and Felix Rodriguez. During the 1979 AT election campaign, Shackley became Bush's speechwriter, and when Bush became vice president under Reagan, Gregg, assisted by Rodriguez, was appointed as his main advisor on national security. Oliver North also became an official on the National Security Council. Working out of Bush's office, this group coordinated the arms for drugs racket that has become known as Iran-Contra. The Sandinista regime in Nicaragua sought to pursue the interests of its own economy and people rather than U.S. corporate interests, so the rebel Contras were backed by the CIA. They were supplied with arms in exchange for drugs which were flown on CIA-chartered planes into Homestead Air Force Base using a CIA code signal. One trafficker flew weapons to the Contras in return for CIA help in flying cocaine into the U.S. by an airstrip of one of North's CIA associates. Oliver North also coordinated the arms for hostages deals with Iran. The money was laundered through the elite's banking headquarters in Switzerland. One reason for the deals with Iran was to pay back the Khomeini regime for it delaying the release of 51 U.S. hostages to prevent Carter taking the credit. Once he had been replaced by Reagan, Bush, the hostages were released as arranged at a meeting in Paris between Iranian officials and Bush, Gregg and John Tower. When the scandal became public, Tower led the investigations into the affair which did not prosecute Bush or Reagan, and those that were identified as being involved were pardoned by Bush before public trials. Tower was to die in a plane crash just when he was beginning to talk openly about the affair. The drugs trade. The trade in hard drugs is very important to the elite for a number of reasons. It provides a source of income to finance other covert operations, it creates a problem for which the public demands a solution of increased police powers and the erosion of personal freedom in an effort to stop the supply, and, by addicting large numbers of particularly the younger generation to hard drugs, self-respect and the ability to think independently are diminished. The background to many engineered conflicts is illuminated by analysis of the drug implications. In Vietnam, a Pepsi-Cola bottling plant was a drug distribution point with CIA helicopters supplying it with drugs from the fields. Drugs were also smuggled back to the U.S. in the body cavities of carefully labeled corpses. In 1986, Bo Gritz, America's most decorated war hero, was sent by the U.S. government into Burma's infamous Golden Triangle to report on missing U.S. prisoners of war. He discovered a man named Khan Sa, who was deemed to be the overlord of heroin in the world, sending an ever-increasing excess of 1,000 tons of heroin into the free world per year. He also discovered that the whole rescue mission of the prisoners was being prevented by the CIA because these soldiers knew too many details of the operation between Khan Sa and the CIA to traffic these drugs. Later, he was told by Jerry King, head of intelligence support activity, ISA, in the CIA that "we've been ordered to put Operation Grand Eagle, the rescue mission, on the shelf as if it never existed. There are still too many bureaucrats that don't want to see American prisoners of war come back alive. The conflict between the U.S. and Panama was a result of Bush turning against Noriega, who was a CIA asset while Bush was director and who had been paid to run drugs. However, having seized power in 1984, despite losing the Democratic election and yet still being officially recognized by President Reagan, Noriega incurred U.S. wrath by refusing to bow to their pressure for his country to invade Nicaragua. The U.S. suddenly turned against the Panama administration under the pretext of drugs, corruption and a lack of democracy. In 1988, Noriega was indicted on drug charges, all bar one of which predated 1984, to a time when he was still on the CIA payroll. In order to arrest one man, the U.S. invaded Panama in 1989, killing 3,000 civilians. Allegedly, the Drug Enforcement Agency, D, paid him $4.7 million to keep quiet about CIA involvement, and at his trial no CIA documents were allowed to be examined. A new government was installed by the U.S., headed by a president and vice president involved with banks known for drug money laundering, and under this new administration drug trafficking from Panama has increased. Nixon and Reagan and George Bush, despite the latter two being regular heroin users, have led public campaigns against drugs which unsurprisingly have achieved little. In association with the major drug cartels, the CIA has arranged small busts to lend credibility to the campaigns, but these are usually to remove insignificant players or larger ones who have outlived their usefulness. In 1981, during the Reagan-Bush administration, the CIA convened a meeting of Colombian dealers to form the Medellin cartel, an infamous group of 200 dealers. There is also evidence to suggest that the Zapata Oil Corporation is a CIA front and that Zapata Offshore is involved in drug smuggling. Both of these companies were set up and are headed by Bush. George Bush was succeeded in the White House by Bill Clinton, a Rhodes Scholar, whose drug credentials are on a par with his predecessor. Whilst governor of Arkansas, he created the Arkansas Development Finance Authority, ADFA, which was to finance drug trafficking. All loan applications were handled by the Rose Law Firm, run by Hillary Clinton, and those which were granted were to Clinton's business associates for use in trafficking. For example, one loan was given to Webb Hubbell of Parkometer, which manufactured retrofit nose cones for drug shipping. The loans were not paid back, but large donations were given to Clinton's election fund. Webb Hubbell became acting U.S. Attorney General under Clinton, and some think he still fulfills that role behind Janet Reno. During the Reagan-Bush anti-drug campaign, whilst Clinton governed Arkansas, the United States' biggest drug trafficking operation was set up in Mena, Arkansas by a D pilot. Many people speaking out or investigating Bill Clinton have died in mysterious circumstances, for which the official cause of death is given as suicide. Conveniently, in a law introduced into Arkansas by Clinton just prior to the first suspicious deaths, no autopsy needs to be performed in cases of deaths attributed to suicide. Satanism. One of the most sinister elements to the manipulation of society is the abuse of esoteric knowledge by the world's secret societies, both for the purposes of political control and for sick personal pleasure. In the U.S. each year 400,000 children are reported missing, and in the UK this number is 98,000. Not all are recovered. All over the world children are hijacked onto a life of sexual abuse, psychological and physical torture. They are bought and sold by members of pedophile rings, often by their own parents, who act as recruiters and handlers in the lower echelons of the secret society network. They are systematically abused, tortured and murdered in ritualistic ceremonies by people who occupy places throughout the social hierarchy all the way to the top. Eyewitness accounts, such as those given by a friend of mine named Patty, who was recruited as a child of 3, have implicated members of the aristocracy, doctors, lawyers, members of the clergy, high-level businessmen, media stars, members of the world's governments, see who we are, mind manipulation, Project Monarch. Sophisticated mind control techniques are used to compartmentalize the memories of the abused to prevent them from revealing the awful truth to the public. Patty has displayed many separate personalities whilst recounting her horrific experiences, displaying the classic symptoms of multiple personality disorder. Often victims are too scared to even mention such things to each other, never mind to strangers. They are brought up in the certain knowledge that they can be easily picked up off the streets or from their beds and drugged for use and abuse at any time. They are fully aware also that their abusers are everywhere, including in the medical professions and police. Victims are ceremonially married to the leaders of the cult and are given their own dark companion, a sinister thought form who will be ever present in order to inform on them if they should ever step out of line. They are often forced to take part in the abuse, murder and disposal of other victims in order to ensure a total attack upon the psyche of the individual concerned, and the victim is soon convinced that they have become at least as guilty of these crimes as their assailants. Therefore, they are ever paranoid and terrified of revealing the truth to anyone other than those who have themselves been victims. Methods of abuse are truly horrendous and include live burials with the uncertainty of being retrieved, physical mutilation, sexual abuse, the enforced killing of family members and animals which have previously been given as pets, the enforced pregnancy for the purpose of subsequent removal of the child for sacrifice, the enforced drinking of blood, eating of feces and cannibalism upon bodies of sacrificial victims, general sustained humiliation, etc. The list is as long as the imagination of the perpetrators of such atrocities allows it to be. Many of the satanic rituals are performed at the altars of out-of-the-way and redundant churches for the purpose of generating terror and negativity within these sacred sites. The energy is then harnessed for personal power and the perpetuation of the Luciferic force upon the earth, as well as to further traumatize their slaves for mind control purposes such as Project Ultra Green, MK Ultra Project Monarch, Freedom Train. In this way the Earth's energy matrix, the collective unconscious, which is continuous with the human psyche, is kept in a negatively imbalanced state, whilst the sickest members of the human race have an obscene outlet for their perverse fantasies. The British intelligence agencies and the USA CIA and NSA are well aware of such organized anathemata, including the identities of those involved and the code names used for such operations, such as Ultra Green and Project Monarch. Patty herself has given her details to various agencies including England's Scotland Yard. However, this global underbelly is so deeply entrenched in the system that these people are left entirely untouched by the legal system. Many cult-busting and rescue organizations exist, most working in tandem with the police, who are rife with this problem, but are themselves kept a closely guarded secret, supposedly in order to minimize the problem of infiltration. This is yet another way of maintaining overall secrecy via compartmentalization within the pyramidal structure in order to preserve the status quo. Even today, at the age of 37, Patty is regularly picked up off the streets to be drugged, raped, tortured or made to actually perform in satanic ceremonies in the role of one of her personalities, which is a priestess within the cult. All of which further traumatizes her and enforces the compartmentalization of her personalities. Her assailants also have an intimate knowledge of black magic and are able to summon her remotely to various locations under the control of her various personalities in order to abduct her. One evening, Patty had paid Shona a visit whilst I was at work and spent the entire night flipping from one personality to another. These personalities ranged from the totally meek, nothing, aged 3, through variously aged Patricias to the quite nasty and foul-mouthed Kathy. In the early hours, she became obsessed with leaving the house to take part in a ritual which she knew was taking place nearby and expressed an overwhelming desire to drink blood. This began at 3:10, the time which Satanists associate with Satan's greatest moment upon earth, the time of the crucifixion of Jesus. A little after 5, when the ritual would have been completed, Patty began to normalize but revealed to Shona that she had taken a drugs overdose, though not enough to do any serious harm. This was entirely out of character for her, as she has spent